The first thing you notice when you drive a 15-ton amphibious cargo carrier through a suburban flash flood isn't the water. It's the sound. It's not the heroic roar you hear in movies. It's a deep, guttural, diesel-powered growl that vibrates through the soles of your feet and into your teeth. It's the sound of pure, unadulterated overkill. Below that, there's the churn. The violent sloshing of 6 massive tires, each taller than a golden retriever, displacing thousands of gallons of murky brown water that used to be Mrs. Davison's prize-winning petunia bed. The water parts before the reinforced steel hull like the Red Sea, only dirtier and probably filled with more lost car keys. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, a piece of equipment roughly the size of a large pizza. Through the thick, bolted-on glass of the cockpit, Harmony Creek Estates looked like a scene from a disaster movie directed by someone with a very boring color palette. Beige houses became beige islands. Perfectly manicured lawns were now churning lakes of mud and lawn gnomes bobbing along like tiny, cheerful corpses. And straight ahead, at the lowest point of the street, was Mr. Henderson's house. Water was already climbing his porch steps. He was trapped. Why? Because of an act of God, compounded by an act of Karen. On her own perfectly dry, slightly elevated lawn stood the Karen in question. Brenda, president of the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association, holding a golf umbrella with the grim determination of a Roman standard-bearer. She was screaming, her face a blotchy mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her words were swallowed by the glorious symphony of my engine, but I could read her lips. "You are creating a wake," I leaned on the horn. It's an air horn salvaged from a freight train. The sound wave alone probably rearranged her fine china. A wide, satisfied grin spread across my face. Oh yeah, she was going to find me into the next millennium, and it was going to be worth every single penny. You're probably wondering how a guy like me ends up with a house in a place called Harmony Creek, and a vehicle that looks like it's about to invade a small country. It's simple, really. I inherited the problem. Both of them. The house came from my grandparents. It's a modest 3-bedroom ranch, the only house on the block that isn't some shade of taupe, tan, or greige. My grandparents built it before the land was sold to a developer who birthed this beige topia, so it was grandfathered in, a little brick of defiance in a sea of vinyl siding. When they passed, they left it to me, along with a bit of money. It was just enough to quit my job as a lead mechanic fixing Strikers and Humvees for Uncle Sam and open my own shop. Misfit Mods. We specialize in making vehicles do things they were never meant to do. You want to put a Hellcat engine in a minivan? I'm your guy. You want to make your Prius a rock-crawling monster? I'll take your money, but I'll judge you for it. My passion, my magnum opus, however, was parked in my driveway. The Albatross. A 1960s Lark Vi, or lighter, amphibious resupply, cargo, 5-ton. I found her rusting in a scrapyard in Louisiana and spent 2 years and most of my inheritance bringing her back to life. She was 35 feet long, 10 feet wide, and painted a beautiful, decidedly non-HOA approved shade of olive drab. To me, she was a masterpiece of engineering. To my neighbors, she was a declaration of war. Which brings me to Brenda. The Tuesday before the flood, she'd appeared at the edge of my driveway like a bad omen. She was in her official HOA president uniform. Pastel polo shirt, crisp white capris, and sensible yet authoritative walking shoes. She clutched a clipboard to her chest like it was a holy relic, and her husband, Gary, trailed a few paces behind her, carrying the perpetual expression of a man who has sighed so many times his soul has developed a permanent slouch. "Jack," she began, without any preamble. The air immediately felt 10 degrees more humid. "Brenda," I said, wiping a grease-stained hand on an already condemned rag. I was polishing the massive chrome grille of the Albatross. "Gary," To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to admire the sheer, unadulterated majesty of American amphibious engineering? Brenda's eye twitched. It was her tell. We've talked about this. Bylaw 7, Section 4C clearly states that all vehicles parked in public view must be aesthetically harmonious with the community. I paused my polishing and leaned against the hull. Harmonious? Brenda, this thing can literally float. It's in harmony with land and sea. That's like double the harmony. You should be thanking me. I'm raising property values with my versatile all-terrain peacekeeping vehicle. Gary shuffled his feet, his eyes darting between a particularly interesting crack in the pavement and the sky. He was a master of being physically present, but mentally on a fishing boat in another dimension. It's an eyesore, Jack, Brenda snapped, her voice tight. It lowers the tone of the entire neighborhood. This is your third notice this month regarding the vehicle. Was the second notice about the oil stain on the driveway? Or the fact that my grass was 3.1 inches high when the bylaws clearly state a maximum of 3 inches? I asked, feigning deep thought. Both, she said without a hint of irony. She tapped her clipboard with a perfectly manicured nail. And that brings me to the second item on today's agenda, your mailbox. I looked at my mailbox. It was a perfectly normal, functional mailbox. What about it? Did a bird look at it funny? It's forest green, she said, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. The approved shade for mailboxes, as you'll recall from the June newsletter, is Woodland Fern. They're very different tones. This notice serves as your final warning before fines are levied. I stared at her. I've seen grown men cry over a stripped engine block. I've watched a sergeant major chew out a private for having dust on his dust. But I had never, in my entire life, witnessed a level of petty so pure, so distilled, it could probably power a small city. Woodland Fern, I repeated slowly. Got it. I'll get right on that. She gave a curt, satisfied nod, as if she'd just successfully negotiated a nuclear disarmament treaty. See that you do. As she and Gary performed a rigid, synchronized pivot and marched away, a gentle voice cut through the lingering cloud of oppression. That's quite a machine you've got there, son. It was Mr. Henderson from next door. He was in his late 70s, with kind eyes and hands permanently stained with rich soil from his prize-winning rose garden. He was one of the few original homeowners left, a fellow brick-and-mortar holdout against the vinyl tide. Hey, Mr. H, I smiled. The tension in my shoulders eased. Just giving the old girl a polish. He shuffled closer, his gaze full of genuine curiosity, not contempt. Always wanted to see that thing run. Bet she makes quite a racket. Only when she's provoked, I said, winking. He chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. He handed me a small paper bag. It was warm from the sun. Tomatoes are coming in strong this year. Thought you might like some. You're a saint, Mr. H. Thank you. I looked up at the sky. The clouds were starting to gather, a bruised purple on the horizon. Looks like that storm they're talking about might actually show up. Aye, he said, his smile fading a little. They say it's a bad one. My Mary, God rest her soul, she never liked the thunder. He patted the side of the Albatross's massive tire. Well, I suppose if the water gets too high, you can just float away. I laughed. You got it. You need anything at all, you just holler. He nodded, gave me a wave, and shuffled back to his yard, the bag of tomatoes a small, warm weight in my hand. I watched him go, a genuinely good man in a neighborhood run by a woman who fought invisible wars over shades of green. The irony was thicker than the coming storm clouds. 2 days later, the sky broke open. It wasn't just rain. It was a biblical deluge. The kind of downpour that makes you wonder if someone upstairs is trying to wash away a particularly stubborn stain. The world outside the bay doors of misfit mods was a gray, roaring blur. "Dude, my mom just texted me. The lower streets are already closed," Leo said, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. Leo was my best friend, my sole employee, and the official minister of worry in my one-man kingdom. He was thin, wired on caffeine, and possessed the unique ability to find the worst-case scenario in any situation. They're saying this is a once-in-a-generation event. "Relax," I said, my voice muffled, as I leaned deep into the engine bay of a client's Jeep. I was trying to wire a new winch system, and the tiny schematic was testing the limits of my patience. "We're on a hill. Besides, once in a generation is what they said about that boy band you liked in high school. Look how that turned out." "Hey, and Syncopation had some deep cuts," he muttered defensively. "My point is, this is serious. The drains can't handle it." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. With a groan, I pulled it out. It was a string of frantic texts from Carol, the neighborhood's unofficial gossip columnist and surveillance expert who lived 2 doors down from me. Carol. "Jack, it's a disaster." Carol. "The storm drain at the bottom of the street is clogged." Carol. "It's all backing up into Mr. Henderson's yard." I straightened up, wiping my hands. "Leo, what do we know about the storm drain on Harmony Creek Lane?" "The one on the corner. It's always been crap. Clogs if a leaf looks at it wrong," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "Why?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Carol. I put it on speaker. "Jack, you will not believe it." Her voice was a high-pitched squawk of panic and morbid excitement. "It's a lake! Mr. Henderson's entire front yard is a lake. The water's almost to his porch." "Okay, calm down, Carol. Did anyone call the city?" Yes, but that's not the point. The point is what Brenda did," she shrieked. "Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, he went out with some sandbags he had in his garage. He was trying to divert the water away from his front door, you know? Just a few of them. Very sensible." I could already feel the dread pooling in my stomach. And Brenda saw him. She drove down in her golf cart in the pouring rain and started screaming at him. I saw it from my window, screaming about unapproved landscape modifications. She was quoting bylaw numbers, Jack, in a flood. My brain was struggling to compute the sheer astronomical levels of pettiness and stupidity. It was like watching a chimp try to perform brain surgery with a banana. "What did she do, Carol?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Carol took a shaky breath. "She made him move them. Well, she and Gary. They got out and they didn't just move them, they threw them aside. But that's not the worst part. Oh no, to prevent further erosion, she said, they pushed one of those huge decorative landscape boulders, the Harmony boulders, she calls them, and rolled it right up against the culvert. They made the clog worse. All the water from the street is funneling directly at his house now. It's like a flume ride from hell." Silence. Even Leo was speechless. Time stopped. Did she just weaponize a rock in the middle of a flood because of sandbags? I squeezed my phone so hard I was surprised it didn't crack. The switch in my head flipped, the one that goes from cynical amusement to righteous fury. I hung up on Carol mid-sentence and immediately dialed Mr. Henderson. The line crackled. Hello?" His voice was thin and shaky. "Mr. H, it's Jack. Are you okay?" "Jack? Oh, thank heavens, the water, it's at the door. It's starting to come in underneath. My landline's dead and my cell is about to die. I don't know what to do. 911 just keeps saying they'll send someone when they can." In the background, I heard a faint, terrified meow. Patches. His cat. That was it. That was all I needed to hear. I turned to Leo, my eyes hard. Fire up the Albatross. Leo's jaw dropped. You can't be serious. Jack, you'll get fined into the next century. You'll be excommunicated. They'll burn a giant beige beaver bylaw breaker on your lawn. I was already grabbing my heavy-duty rain jacket and a toolkit from the wall. I wasn't thinking about fines or bylaws or the delicate sensibilities of my neighbors. I was thinking about a scared old man and his cat, trapped by a malevolent garden gnome in a polo shirt. "What's the plan?" Leo asked. His voice a squeak as he followed me out of the office and into the cavernous garage where the Albatross sat waiting. "What are you even going to do?" I swung myself up the ladder into the cockpit and flicked a series of heavy-duty switches. Gauges flickered to life. The fuel pump whined. "What's the plan?" I said, looking down at him. "Mr. Henderson is trapped by a flood caused by a woman whose brain is powered by decaf and spite. I have a 15-ton boat with wheels. The plan is making itself, Leo." I turned the key. The massive diesel engine coughed once, then twice, before roaring to life with a ground-shaking bellow that rattled every tool on the walls. I flipped on the floodlights, casting eerie beams through the rain-streaked darkness, and hit the switch for the rotating amber beacon on the roof. I put the beast in gear. With a lurch, the Albatross rolled forward out of the garage and into the storm. It was time to go to war. The drive down my own street was the most surreal experience of my life. The Albatross handled the 3 feet of water like it was a puddle. The massive tires didn't even notice the submerged curbs. Mailboxes glided past my window like channel markers. I saw a pink flamingo yard ornament sail by, looking surprisingly majestic in its final voyage. I steered the behemoth around the corner onto Harmony Creek Lane. And there it was, the scene of the crime. Mr. Henderson's house was an island in a brown, churning sea. The water was halfway up his front door, and standing on her lawn, which was just high enough to remain an emerald-green peninsula of smug dryness, was Brenda. She was actually trying to flag me down, waving her arms like a deranged air traffic controller. As I got closer, her face contorted in a mask of fury. The roar of the engine was deafening, but I could see her mouth forming the words. "What do you think you're doing? You are creating a wake! A wake! That is a direct violation of—" Her voice was a gnat in a hurricane. I gave her a jaunty little wave and throttled down slightly, the engine noise dropping to a deep rumble. "Sorry, Brenda, can't hear you," I bellowed, leaning out the side window. "I'm busy unstranding the neighbor you trapped. Might want to check the bylaws on manslaughter by stupidity." Her face went from red to a sort of pale, slack-jawed horror as she realized exactly how this was going to look for her. It was a beautiful sight. I ignored her and focused on the task at hand. Maneuvering a 35-foot-long vehicle in a space designed for Toyota Camrys was tricky, but the water gave me some leeway. I carefully nudged the bow of the Albatross right up to Mr. Henderson's porch. With the satisfying hiss of hydraulics, I lowered the front ramp. It came down with a heavy thump, landing perfectly on the top step of his porch, creating a solid metal bridge from his flooded home to safety. I killed the engine and scrambled down the ramp. The water was frigid, swirling around my boots. "Mr. H!" I yelled, pushing open his front door. The scene inside was heartbreaking. The first floor was a ruin. Water sloshed around the legs of his sofa and armchair. A lifetime of memories, photo albums, books, his late wife's little porcelain figurines were either soaked or floating in the murky water. Mr. Henderson was standing on the bottom step of his staircase, holding a terrified, soaking wet ball of feline fluff. Patches the cat looked like a drowned rat. Mr. H himself was shivering, his trousers soaked to the knees. "Jack," he said, his voice thick with relief, I didn't know what to do." "You did the right thing. You called me," I said, putting a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Let's get you and this little guy out of here." I took Patches from him, tucking the trembling cat inside my jacket, and gently guided Mr. Henderson out the door and up the ramp. He moved slowly, his eyes wide as he took in the cavernous interior of the truck. I got him settled on one of the fold-down bench seats and wrapped him in an emergency blanket I kept stashed for exactly this kind of not really an emergency I ever expected. As I turned to go back up the ramp to see if there was anything I could quickly salvage, I saw it. Brenda's decorative boulder, the agent of all this chaos, wedged perfectly in the mouth of the storm drain. It was so perfectly, maliciously placed, it was almost artistic. I felt a surge of white-hot anger. I stomped back into the cockpit, fired up the engine, and retracted the ramp. As I backed away from the house, I gave Brenda a long, hard stare. She was still standing there, umbrella in hand, looking utterly defeated. Good. Getting Mr. Henderson and Patches to my house was the easy part. My driveway was on high ground, well away from the water. I got him inside, stripped off his wet socks, and sat him in my warmest armchair with a hot cup of tea, while Patches immediately found the heating vent and began the arduous process of drying himself. Just as a semblance of calm was settling, the strobing red and blue lights began to paint the houses across the street. 2 police cruisers had pulled up at the edge of the floodwater, unable to advance further. Showtime. 2 officers got out of their cruisers. The first was a veteran, you could tell by the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, and with an aura of profound weariness, as if the entire world was a personal inconvenience. His name tag read Miller. The second was a rookie, young, eager, with a haircut so fresh you could still smell the aftershave. His name tag said Davis. "Well, Frank," Davis said, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. The flooded street, the irate woman with the umbrella, and the massive military vehicle parked in my driveway. "You don't see that every day." Miller just sighed, a deep, soulful sound. "It's not even 10 p.m. Just once I'd like a quiet storm, no drama." They made their way over. Brenda, sensing an audience and a chance to reclaim authority, scurried to meet them, launching into her narrative before they could even ask a question. "Officers, thank God you're here," she began, pointing a trembling finger at me as I came out onto my porch. "This man, Jack, he is a menace. He drove that thing down the street, creating a dangerous wake, damaging public property. He has no respect for the rules, for the community." I leaned against my porch railing, sipping the coffee I'd just made. "Evening, officers." Miller's eyes flicked from Brenda to me, to the giant truck, and back to Brenda. "Ma'am, can you just slow down, sir?" he said, turning to me. "Can you explain what all of this is?" "Just performing a citizen's rescue, officer," I said calmly. "My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, here, was trapped by the floodwaters. 911's a bit busy at the moment, as you can imagine. I used the tools at my disposal, big floaty tools." "He's lying!" Brenda shrieked. "He's trying to make me look bad. I was simply enforcing community standards about unapproved structures." Officer Davis, who had been circling the Albatross with a look of pure, unadulterated awe, chimed in, unable to help himself. "Is that a Lark V? Seriously? I saw one of these at a military show once. The torque on these things is insane. This is awesome." Miller shot him a glare that could curdle milk. "Davis, focus." He turned back to me. "A citizen's rescue." Right on cue, the front door opened and Mr. Henderson stepped out, wrapped in one of my old army blankets. He looked frail, but his voice was steady. "It's true, officer," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet, rain-soaked air. "The water was coming into my house. Brenda, she and her husband removed the sandbags I had put out. They blocked the drain with that big rock over there." He pointed a shaky finger towards the still visible corner of the decorative boulder. As if summoned by the drama, Carol's front door creaked open, and she poked her head out. "He's right," she yelled. "I saw the whole thing from my window. She trapped him in there." Miller's expression underwent a fascinating transformation. The annoyance he'd directed at me solely drained away, replaced by a deep, weary, and utterly profound annoyance with Brenda. He looked at her, then at the boulder, then at the flooded house. He took off his hat and wiped a hand over his tired face. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dangerously low, "potentially endangering a resident during a federally declared state of emergency is, and I want you to listen closely, a little more serious than an unapproved mailbox color." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound came out. The clipboard hung limply at her side, its power utterly gone. Miller took our statements. He was professional by the book, but I could see the grudging respect in his eyes when he finally closed his notepad. He even gave the Albatross a long, curious look. "Try to keep it parked, son," he said to me, not unkindly. "My shift ends in 2 hours, and the paperwork for this is already going to be a novel." He paused. "But nice work." He tipped his hat to Mr. Henderson and led a sputtering, defeated Brenda back toward her house, suggesting she remain inside for the rest of the evening. Officer Davis lingered for a moment, a huge grin on his face. "Dude," he said in a low voice. "That was legendary, absolutely legendary." He gave me a quick thumbs up before jogging to catch up with his partner. As the police cruisers pulled away, a new quiet settled over the street, broken only by the gentle lapping of the water. Mr. Henderson was safe. Brenda was silenced. I had won, or so I thought. I had severely underestimated the tenacity of a Karen scorned. The next morning, the sun came out with a vengeance, as if embarrassed by the previous day's theatrics. It revealed a world caked in a uniform layer of stinking brown mud. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind a trail of debris, overturned garbage cans, and profound regret for anyone who had left their car parked on the street. My first inkling that things had escalated came when my phone started vibrating like it was trying to achieve liftoff. It hadn't stopped since 6 a.m. I'd been up most of the night with Mr. Henderson, making sure he was comfortable and helping him make the first of many frustrating calls to his insurance company. I finally looked at my screen. Dozens of texts, missed calls, and a link from Leo. The link was to a local news blog. The headline read, "Captain Suburbia, local man uses military amphibious vehicle to rescue neighbor trapped by HOA dispute." Below it was a grainy, but undeniably epic, helicopter shot of the Albatross sailing down Harmony Creek Lane. My story, or at least a sensationalized version of it, had gone viral overnight. Someone, and I had a strong suspicion it was a certain rookie cop named Davis, had leaked the details. I was no longer Jack, the weirdo mechanic. I was Flood Guy. Leo called. I picked up. I couldn't even hear him over his own hysterical laughter. "Captain Suburbia!" he howled. "Oh man, you're a folk hero. People are calling Brenda Hozilla. The comment section is a dumpster fire of glory." "It's not funny, Leo," I said, but a smile was tugging at my lips. "Oh, it's hilarious," he crowed. "You stuck it to the man, or the woman. The beige, joyless woman. This is the best thing that's ever happened." His optimism was, as usual, premature. Later that afternoon, after I'd surveyed the heartbreaking damage at Mr. Henderson's house, the entire first floor was a write-off, I found an envelope taped to my front door. It was thick, creamy cardstock, with the Harmony Creek Estates HOA logo embossed in gold. It felt ominously heavy. Inside was not a letter of commendation. It was a multi-page itemized invoice of pure distilled vengeance. Brenda, it turned out, had not been idle. She had called an emergency HOA board meeting, a board comprised of her hand-picked cronies, and had pushed through a series of fines that were both breathtaking in their audacity and legally dubious. The list included $500, operation of a non-standard/commercial/military vehicle on residential streets. $1,000, creation of a hazardous wake, resulting in potential erosion to community-owned lawns. $250, unapproved deployment of a private rescue vehicle. I didn't even know that was a thing. $750, property damage resulting from mud tracks left by said vehicle on community pavement. $300, failure to obtain prior written consent for an emergency action. $150. And the cherry on top, a renewed fine for the forest green mailbox, with a late fee. Total, $2,950. I stared at the paper, my blood running cold. I thought I'd won. I thought common sense and human decency had carried the day. Turns out, I'd just poked the bear, and the bear was now coming at me with a lawyer and a 3-ring binder full of bylaws. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The next few days were a blur of frustrating phone calls, the smell of mildew, and a growing sense of injustice. Mr. Henderson's insurance adjuster came, a man with the cheerful demeanor of an undertaker, and explained in painstaking detail all the things the policy didn't cover. The deductible alone was enough to make a grown man weep. Mr. Henderson, bless his heart, just sat in my living room looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, staring at the ruin of his life's work. That was when I knew I couldn't just fight the fines. I had to fix this, all of it. My first call was to Gus. Gus was a contractor I knew through the shop, a burly, bearded mountain of a man whose default expression was a deep-seated skepticism of the entire human race. He built things to last and had no patience for nonsense, which made him the perfect man for the job. I explained the situation on the phone. "So, let me get this straight," Gus's gravelly voice rumbled. "The job is a full flood remediation and rebuild on a house for a nice old guy. Standard stuff. The catch is, the HOA president is the Wicked Witch of the West, and she'll be trying to shut us down every 5 minutes for breathing too loud." "That's the gist of it, yeah," I said. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Does this have anything to do with that giant green boat truck I saw on the news?" "Maybe." Another pause, then a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "I'll be there in an hour. This sounds fun." Gus was as good as his word. He arrived in a Ford F-350 that looked like it ate Priuses for breakfast. He took one look at the damage in Mr. Henderson's house, whistled low, and started making a list. Within a day, his crew was there, and the sounds of demolition, sledgehammers, saws, and the ripping of ruined drywall filled the air. It took Brenda less than 2 hours to make her appearance. She marched up the driveway, clipboard in hand, looking like a drill sergeant about to inspect the barracks. "Excuse me," she announced. "I am the president of this homeowners association. I'll need to see your permits, your contractor's license, your insurance binder, and a full-color pallet proposal for any and all new materials." Gus, who was built like a vending machine and was currently covered in drywall dust, slowly turned. He looked at her, then looked at the clipboard, then looked back at her. He didn't say a word. He just stared. He had a stare that could make a drill sergeant nervous. Finally, he turned his head to me. "You weren't kidding," he said. He then produced a folder thick enough to stop a bullet and handed it to her. "Permits are all filed with the city. License and insurance are in there. Color palette is Get the Damn Job Done beige. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're on a schedule." That set the tone for the entire week. Brenda became a permanent fixture, a goblin of bureaucracy haunting the worksite. She complained that the saws were too loud at 9:01 a.m., despite quiet hours ending at 9 o'clock. She got out a tape measure and declared their extension cords were 3 inches too long to be lying on the grass. She tried to fine Gus's crew for parking their work truck on the street, claiming it was a commercial vehicle. Each time, Gus would calmly and legally shut her down, citing city ordinances and the state of emergency declaration which superseded most of her petty rules. It was a masterclass in professional stonewalling. I'd bring the crew coffee and donuts every morning and watch the show, providing my own sarcastic commentary from the sidelines. But the fines against me were still piling up, and Brenda was now threatening to put a lien on my house. My lawyer said we had a good case, but it would be long and expensive. We needed a different strategy. We needed to go on the offensive. It was Leo who came up with the idea. He had been following my viral fame with an almost religious fervor. "We fight her in the court of public opinion," he said, pacing around my kitchen. "And we use malicious compliance. We start a GoFundMe." "For my legal fees? No way. I'm not asking for handouts." "No, not for you, you idiot," he said, tapping his temple. "For Mr. Henderson. We start a page to help Mr. Henderson rebuild after HOA Zilla's flood. We tell the whole story. The sandbags, the boulder, all of it. We post pictures of the damage. We let the internet do what it does best, get righteously indignant. It was brilliant, devious, a little bit dirty, and absolutely, perfectly brilliant. I sat down and wrote the page myself, in my signature style. I was snarky, I was sarcastic, but I was also honest. I laid out the facts, highlighting Brenda's petty tyranny and Mr. Henderson's plight. I ended it with, "This community is called Harmony Creek. It's time we put a little harmony back in it. Every dollar goes directly to restoring the home of a good man who just wanted to protect his property." We hit publish. Within an hour, it had 100 shares. By the end of the day, the local news had picked it up. By the end of the week, we had blown past our goal to cover his deductible, and were well on our way to covering the entire cost of the renovation. People were sending messages of support from all over the country. My story had a villain, a victim, and a hero with a giant amphibious truck. It was irresistible. But Leo wasn't done. While I was becoming the reluctant face of the resistance, he was hunched over his laptop in the back office of Misfit Mods, digging. "You won't believe this," he said, calling me late one night, his voice buzzing with discovery. "I've been looking through the HOA's public financial statements for the last 5 years. Find anything good? Did she use HOA funds to build a solid gold clipboard?" "Better," he said, and I could hear him grinning. "Who owns Gary's glorious gardens and groundskeeping?" "Let me guess. Gary?" "Bingo. And which company has been awarded every single non-competitive bid contract for community landscaping, tree trimming, and lawn maintenance for the past 5 years?" The pieces clicked into place. "You're kidding me." "I am not. And guess who provides the approved decorative landscape boulders for the neighborhood?" My jaw tightened. "Gary's Glorious Gardens. To the tune of $1,200 a pop," Leo finished triumphantly. "She didn't just use a rock to flood his house, Jack. She used an overpriced rock that she'd forced the community to buy from her own husband. This changed everything. This wasn't just petty tyranny anymore. This was a potential conflict of interest, an abuse of power for financial gain. The plot, like the floodwater, was thickening. And I finally had the ammunition I needed to end this war for good. The final showdown was scheduled for a Thursday night in the community clubhouse, a building so profoundly beige it seemed to absorb light. The HOA had called a mandatory community-wide meeting. The main item on the agenda, a vote to approve the board's motion to place a legal lien on my property for my outstanding, and now infamous, fines. This was Brenda's kill shot. She wanted to make an example of me. The room was packed. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and simmering suburban resentment. Brenda stood at the podium, looking serene and powerful, a queen addressing her subjects. Her cronies on the board were arranged behind her like a council of gargoyles. She began her presentation, her voice smooth and reasonable. She painted me as a reckless renegade, a threat to the peaceful, harmonious, and aesthetically compliant way of life they all cherished. She showed pictures of the mud tracks on the pavement. She talked about property values and the sanctity of the bylaws. She was good, I had to give her that. She was very, very good at spinning her narrative. Then it was my turn. I walked up to the podium, not with a binder, but with a laptop and a small projector. Gus had come, along with his entire crew, and they stood grim-faced along the back wall like a posse of lumberjacks. Mr. Henderson sat in the front row, looking nervous but resolute. Leo gave me a thumbs up from the side. "Evening, everyone," I said, my voice calm. "My name is Jack. You might know me as Flood Guy." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Brenda's eye twitched. "Brenda has made her case," I continued, plugging my laptop into the projector. "And she's right about a few things. I did violate some rules. The Albatross is probably not aesthetically harmonious. And my wake might have been robust." More chuckles. "But the rule book, thick as it is, doesn't have a chapter for what to do when your HOA president decides to play God with a garden boulder and nearly drowns a senior citizen over a couple of sandbags." A hush fell over the room. I clicked the first slide. It was a still from a neighbor's cell phone video showing the Albatross's ramp resting on Mr. Henderson's porch, the floodwater swirling around it. The next slide was a picture of the inside of his house, the muddy water covering his ruined furniture. The next was a picture of Mr. H and Patches, wrapped in blankets in my living room. The mood in the room began to shift. You could feel it. The quiet sympathy was turning into a low murmur of anger. "Brenda is asking you to fine me almost $3,000 for saving my neighbor's life," I said. "Meanwhile, thanks to the generosity of strangers from all over the country, we raised over $15,000 to fix Mr. Henderson's home. People who have never even been to Harmony Creek showed more harmony and more community spirit than the president of our own HOA." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I went for the knockout. "Now, about those fines for property damage. Specifically, the damage caused by Brenda's concern over unapproved landscape modifications." I got curious about our landscaping. I clicked to the next slide. It was a screenshot of the HOA's financial statement, showing a payment to Gary's Glorious Gardens and Groundskeeping. I followed it with the state business filing, showing Gary as the sole proprietor. "It seems our HOA has been exclusively employing a company owned by our president's husband for the last 5 years, without a competitive bidding process. A direct violation of Bylaw 14, Section 8, which calls for a transparent bidding process for all contracts over $5,000. A gasp went through the crowd. Gary, sitting in the front row, seemed to shrink into his polo shirt. His face was the color of spoiled milk. "And those decorative boulders?" I clicked again. The next slide was an invoice from Gary's company to the HOA. "The one used to block the storm drain? The HOA paid $1,200 for that rock. I'm just a dumb mechanic," I said, looking out at the sea of shocked faces. "But that doesn't seem very harmonious with our budget, does it?" Chaos. It wasn't loud at first, just a rising tide of angry whispers. Then people started standing up. A woman in the back shouted, "I asked about the landscaping budget last year, and she told me it was confidential." An older man stood up and yelled, "That's our money! You've been paying your husband with our money!" Brenda stood at the podium, her face ashen. Her power, built on a foundation of rules and intimidation, was crumbling around her. She banged the gavel, but no one was listening. The board member running the meeting, a nervous man named Stan, finally called for the vote on the lien against my property. "All in favor?" he squeaked. Brenda and two of her cronies raised their hands. All opposed? A forest of hands shot up. Gus's crew all raised their hands. Mr. Henderson raised his hand. Even Carol, the neighborhood gossip, raised her hand with righteous fury. The motion was crushed. But it wasn't over. A man I'd never seen before stood up. "I move for a new vote," he declared. "A vote of no confidence in Brenda as HOA president." The room erupted in a roar of approval. Stan, looking terrified, stammered through the motion. The result was a foregone conclusion. Brenda was voted out in a landslide. Her reign of beige terror was over. She and Gary scurried out of the clubhouse, a fallen queen and her court jester, to a chorus of boos and angry shouts. The room was buzzing. People were shaking my hand, clapping me on the back. A new, much more reasonable neighbor named Dave was elected interim president. His first official act was to table a motion to formally dismiss all fines against me and to issue a formal apology to Mr. Henderson. It passed unanimously. Observing from the back of the room, leaning against the wall, was Officer Davis. He wasn't in uniform, but it was him. He caught my eye, smiled, and gave me a subtle, perfect thumbs up. A few weeks later, a new kind of harmony had settled over Harmony Creek. The work on Mr. Henderson's house was complete. It looked better than ever. The smell of fresh paint and new beginnings replacing the stench of mildew and despair. Gus and his crew were packing up their tools for the last time. He walked over and clapped me on the shoulder with a hand the size of a cinder block. "You know," he rumbled, a rare smile cracking his beard, "for a rich kid neighborhood, you guys aren't all bad. But that Brenda, she was a piece of work." "They can't all be winners, Gus," I said, handing him a cold drink. "Thanks for everything." "Any time," he said, taking a long pull. "You ever want to sell that boat truck, you call me first." I just laughed. Not a chance. That evening, the final scene was one of perfect, quiet victory. I was sitting on my front porch, sipping a well-deserved beer. The Albatross was parked proudly in the driveway, its olive-drab hull gleaming under the setting sun. Next door, Mr. Henderson was tending to his new rose bushes, a vibrant, defiant crimson that was most certainly not on any approved color list. Patches the cat was sunning himself on the porch railing. Leo pulled up in his beat-up Civic, a pizza box on the passenger seat. He got out and surveyed the scene. "So," he said, plopping down in the chair next to me, "you saved an old man, dethroned a suburban tyrant, and became a local folk hero. What are you going to do next? Run for mayor?" I took a long, slow sip of my beer, the evening air cool and clean. I looked at Mr. Henderson's happy, peaceful face. I looked at my giant, ridiculous, beautiful truck. I looked at my own front lawn, and an idea, a wonderfully petty, gloriously defiant idea, began to form. "I don't know," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. "The mailbox is still forest green. I'm thinking of painting it screaming fire engine red." Leo threw his head back and laughed. And for the first time since I'd moved in, the sound of genuine joy felt right at home in Harmony Creek.